They call it community power redistribution, but I call it a 400-volt lesson in physics. And from where I was standing, the lesson had just concluded with a catastrophic failure of the student. Smoke billowed from the sleek, gray Tesla Model S parked halfway up my driveway, the acrid scent of melting lithium and burning plastic overpowering the scent of freshly cut grass. Sparks showered onto the manicured lawn like angry fireflies refusing to die, popping and hissing as they hit the damp earth. Standing in the center of the chaos was Corinne Ashford, wearing her signature light blue suit that looked pristine 20 minutes ago, but was now dusted with gray soot. She was screaming, her face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage, pointing a manicured finger directly at my chest, while a siren wailed in the distance, getting louder with every second. "You destroyed my car!" she shrieked, her voice cracking under the strain of her hysteria. "That is assault on personal property! That is a hate crime against sustainability!" I stood calmly on my porch, a digital multimeter in my hand, watching the motherboard of her beloved vehicle melt into a puddle of expensive slag. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply watched the inevitable result of ignorance colliding with high voltage. Standing 10 feet behind her, almost swallowed by the shadows of the oak trees, was Julian Vane. He wore a charcoal cashmere turtleneck that probably cost more than my first car, and he held a small leather notebook. He did not look panicked. He did not look like he wanted to help her. He simply watched Corinne unravel, made a small note in his book, and then locked eyes with me. There was no animosity in his gaze, just a cold, professional acknowledgement, the way a chess player acknowledges an opponent who just took his queen. Corinne thought her title as Homeowners Association president gave her immunity to Ohm's law, but she was wrong. She thought the man in the turtleneck was her savior, but she was wrong about that too. The fire truck turned the corner, its air horn blasting, and I checked the reading on my multimeter one last time. 0.0. The circuit was open. The lesson was complete. To understand why a $50,000 electric vehicle was currently serving as a smoke signal in a quiet subdivision, you have to rewind exactly 3 weeks. Back then, the only thing smoking was the tip of my soldering iron. It was 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, and my garage looked less like a place to park a sedan and more like the bridge of a nuclear submarine. I am a grid systems architect for defense contracts, which is a fancy way of saying I design the systems that keep military bases powered when the rest of the world goes dark. I do not deal in consumer electronics. I do not deal in smart fridges that tweet when you run out of milk. I deal in heavy industrial loads, harmonic distortion, and maintaining a 60 Hz frequency with absolute, unwavering precision. I was in the middle of soldering a high-density capacitor onto a server rack I used to monitor regional grid variance when the lights flickered. It was subtle, a dip so fast the human eye would barely register it, but to me, it was a scream. My uninterruptible power supply units let out a high-pitched whine, kicking over to battery power for 3 milliseconds before stabilizing. I froze, the soldering iron hovering inches from the board. That was not a grid fluctuation. The regional variances on my monitors were flat. This was local, extremely local. I looked at the load variance monitor I keep running on a dedicated screen above my workbench. A massive, unexplained draw had just hit my main line. It was not a spike. Spikes are momentary. This was a parasitic drain, a sudden and sustained demand of nearly 200 amps. I set the iron down and walked over to the main distribution panel. The hum of the garage changed pitch. It was deeper, throbbing with strain. Someone was pulling enough juice to weld steel, and they were doing it through my meter. I grabbed the thermal imaging camera from the rack and stepped out into the night. The air was cool, the neighborhood silent in that way only wealthy suburbs can be, where the silence feels enforced rather than natural. I scanned the side of my house. The thermal image on the screen showed my breaker panel glowing a soft orange, normal for the load I run. But then I traced the line down to the ground. There, buried beneath the fresh mulch I had laid down 2 months ago, was a streak of angry, bright red heat. It was a subterranean vein of stolen power, pulsing through the dirt. I followed the heat signature, walking slowly along my property line. The red streak did not stop at my meter. It bypassed the safety shutoffs completely, a clumsy, dangerous splice that violated about 15 different sections of the National Electric Code. I followed the glowing line across the grass, past the property marker, and through the decorative hedges that separated my lot from the community greenbelt. The heat signature ended abruptly at a brand new, gleaming white pedestal installed right next to the driveway of the house next door. The pedestal had a glowing green ring around the top and a decal that read HOA Management Priority Charging. Parked next to it, plugged in and humming with my electricity, was a gray Tesla. And standing in the window of the house watching me through the blinds was a silhouette in a high-collared shirt. I lowered the camera. This was not a mistake. This was an installation. I went back inside, but I did not go to sleep. I spent the rest of the night reviewing the schematics of my property and the easement rights I had secured when I bought this place. I did not buy this house on a real estate app. I bought it at a blind federal liquidation auction. To the neighbors, it was a mid-century modern renovation project. To the Department of Defense, it was formerly Decommissioned Strategic Relay Station 4. I own the transformer. I own the poles. I own the dirt 6 feet down. And I have the blueprints to prove that the Homeowners Association has zero jurisdiction over what is classified as strategic infrastructure. Quick question before this voltage spikes and things get really heated. I am curious. Where are the power grids you are watching this story from? Drop your country below so I can see how far this signal is reaching. The sun came up with a deceptive cheerfulness, casting long shadows across the lawn where the crime was buried. I was outside by 7 a.m., standing over the spot where the splice entered the earth. I had a shovel in one hand and a copy of the National Electric Code in the other. I did not have to wait long. At 7:15, the front door of the neighboring house opened, and Corinne Ashford marched out. She was wearing a light blue suit that looked sharp enough to cut glass, holding a Starbucks cup like a royal scepter. But she was not alone. Walking a step behind her, moving with a fluid, predatory grace, was the man I had seen in the window. He was tall, thin, and dressed in a black cashmere turtleneck and gray slacks. He held a leather notebook and a pen, and he whispered something to Corinne as they approached. She nodded, her posture straightening, her chin lifting. It was subtle, but I saw it. He was winding her up. He was the tension. She was the release.
"Good morning," Corinne chirped, though her tone suggested it was anything but. "I see you found the new Community Green Initiative tab. It is wonderful, isn't it? As the owner of the largest lot with the most robust transformer, your property was designated the host node." She stopped 3 feet away, smiling that tight, plastic smile that politicians use before they raise your taxes. I looked at the dirt, then at her, then at the man in the turtleneck. He was studying me, his eyes dark and calculating. "You spliced a 200-amp draw into a secure line without a permit," I said, keeping my voice flat. "You bypassed the meter and the safety ground. That is not a tap, Corinne. That is a fire hazard,
And it is theft." Corinne's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She looked back at the man. He stepped forward just an inch and lowered his voice to a smooth, resonant baritone. "Mr. Vance, is it?" he asked. "I am Julian Vane. I consult for the board on emotional architecture and community cohesion. I think you are framing this incorrectly." He looked at Corinne, not me. "See, Corinne? He is using technical jargon to create a barrier. He wants you to feel small. He wants you to think you do not understand the flow of energy. He is trying to block your abundance." It was a masterclass in manipulation. He wasn't addressing the legal issue. He was attacking her insecurity. Corinne's eyes hardened. The hesitation vanished, replaced by a zealous shine. "Exactly," she snapped, turning back to me with renewed aggression. "You are trying to gatekeep sustainability. Check the bylaws. New neighbor. Section 8C, utility easement sharing. We voted on it last night while you were sleeping. It allows the board to allocate resources for the greater good. Don't be selfish." "Section 8C applies to water sprinklers and fence maintenance," I replied, my patience thinning. "It does not allow you to trench through my yard and steal industrial-grade current to charge your personal vehicle." Julian scribbled something in his notebook. "He is calling your leadership theft, Corinne," Julian murmured, his voice like silk wrapping around a knife. "He thinks that because he lives in a big house, he dictates the flow. He is challenging your authority to provide for the community." Corinne bristled, her knuckles turning white around her coffee cup. "This conversation is over," she declared. "The tap stays. If you tamper with community property, you will be fined. And Mr. Vance here documents everything." She spun on her heel and marched back toward her house, energized by the conflict. Julian lingered for a moment. He looked at the shovel in my hand, then up at my face. He smiled, a small, knowing expression that made my skin crawl. "She needs to feel powerful," he said softly, almost to himself. "And you are the perfect obstacle for her to overcome. Do not take it personally. It is just structural tension." Then he turned and followed her, leaving me standing over a high-voltage felony. I waited until they drove off, Corinne in her Tesla, Julian in a black sedan with tinted windows, before I went to work. I did not call the police. Not yet. Police take reports. They do not fix physics. I took a pair of insulated heavy-duty cutters from my belt. I dug down 6 inches to expose the orange cable. It was sloppy work, undoubtedly done by some unlicensed hack she paid in cash. The insulation was nicked, and the ground wire was wrapped loosely around a corroded pipe. I clamped the cutters around the copper core and squeezed. There was a satisfying crunch as the connection severed. The hum in my garage ceased instantly. The voltage on my handheld meter stabilized. I capped the live ends with industrial safety nuts and buried the evidence. Then I went inside and pulled up the footage from my perimeter security cameras. I needed to know exactly who dug this trench. The timestamp showed 3 a.m. the previous night. A van pulled up. A man got out, heavy set, wearing a tool belt that looked like it had survived a war. He smoked a cigarette while he dug, flicking ash into my flower beds. I zoomed in on the van. Rocco's 24-hour electric. No license number on the side. Just a phone number. I saved the clip. The fine arrived 48 hours later. It was taped to my front door in a thick, cream-colored envelope embossed with the Greenhaven HOA crest. Inside was a letter on heavy bond paper signed by a lawyer named Thorne and a citation. Fine number 4092, destruction of community sustainability infrastructure. Penalty, $5,000. Beneath the legal jargon was a handwritten note on sticky paper stuck to the bottom. This is a teaching moment. Do not resist the current. It wasn't signed by Corinne. The handwriting was elegant, sharp, and precise. It was Julian. He was taunting me. He was treating this extortion like a therapy session. I walked into my kitchen and laid the fine on the counter next to my thermal scans. This was not about money. $5,000 was a rounding error in the contracts I managed. This was about dominance. Julian Vane was using Corinne as a battering ram to test my defenses. He wanted to see if I would crack. He wanted to see if I would scream or sue or fold. He did not know what he was poking a bear that lived in a bunker. I was inspecting the severed line 2 days later when a white van screeched into my driveway. It was Rocco. He hopped out, looking exactly like he did in the security footage. Grease-stained jeans, a sleeveless shirt, and a cigarette dangling from his lip. He walked right up to me, ignoring the private property sign. "Lady says you cut my line," he grunted, crossing his arms. His biceps were the size of tree trunks, covered in faded tattoos. "Your line?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "You trespassed on private property and performed an illegal splice. You are lucky you did not electrocute yourself." Rocco laughed, a wet, hacking sound. "Look, buddy, I don't care about permits. The lady pays cash. She says hook it up, I hook it up. You touch it again, you deal with me." He took a step closer, invading my personal space, blowing smoke in my face. "And I ain't a fuse you can blow." I looked past him. Parked across the street, watching from the safety of the sidewalk, was Julian. He was leaning against a tree, arms crossed, watching the confrontation like it was a play he had written. He gave me a tiny nod. He had sent the muscle. He wanted a reaction. He wanted me to fight Rocco so Corinne could call the cops and paint me as the aggressor. "Go ahead," I said to Rocco, stepping aside and gesturing to the hole in the ground. "Hook it up. Ground it to the fence if you want. Do your best work." Rocco blinked, confused by my sudden capitulation. He looked back at Julian, who seemed equally surprised, but quickly recovered, jotting something down in his notebook. "Yeah, that's what I thought," Rocco sneered. "Smart move, tech boy." He grabbed his shovel and went to work. I stood on my porch and watched. I watched him twist the wires together. I watched him use cheap electrical tape instead of heat shrink tubing. I watched him connect the ground wire to a rusted rebar stake that barely touched the soil. It was an abomination of engineering. It was a ticking time bomb. And it was exactly what I needed. When Rocco finished, he dusted his hands off on his pants and glared at me. "It's live. Don't make me come back." He drove off. Julian walked over to the fresh patch of dirt, inspected it, and then looked up at me on the porch. "Acceptance is the first step to community integration," he called out, his voice smooth and carrying easily across the lawn. "Corinne will be pleased you have chosen peace." I didn't say a word. I just went back inside and locked the door. Acceptance? No. This was calibration. I walked into my garage and locked the heavy steel door behind me. The hum was back, the parasitic drain sucking my power. I sat down at my workbench and pulled up a fresh schematic on my CAD software. Cutting the wire was playing defense. Defense implies you are waiting to be hit. I was done waiting. I was going to play offense. I needed a device, not a blocker. Blockers are passive. I needed a mirror, a voltage mirror. I pulled a crate of components from under the bench, high-speed switching transistors, a programmable logic controller, and a variable frequency drive I had salvaged from a radar installation. The concept was simple in theory, but complex in execution. Tesla chargers use a specific handshake protocol, a digital conversation between the car and the charger to agree on voltage and amperage. I needed to build a device that would sit on my line, invisible to normal loads, but vigilant. It would listen for that handshake. When it detected the unique digital signature of Corinne's car asking for power, it would intercept the signal. Instead of sending the clean 60 Hz sine wave that consumer electronics crave, my device would cycle the frequency. I would ramp it up to 400 Hz. 400 Hz is the standard for military aircraft and aerospace applications. It allows for lighter transformers and motors, but if you feed 400 Hz into a device designed for 60 Hz, like, say, the AC to DC onboard charger of a luxury electric vehicle, the results are catastrophic. The iron cores in the transformers overheat instantly. The capacitors swell and burst. The semiconductors panic and fail. It creates a harmonic resonance that essentially vibrates the electronics to death from the inside out. I spent the next 3 nights soldering. My garage smelled of rosin and ozone. I programmed the logic controller to recognize Corinne's specific VIN number, which her charger broadcasted every time she plugged in. I wasn't going to hurt anyone else. If Rocco plugged in a drill, he would get normal power. If Julian plugged in his phone, he would get normal power. But if Corinne Ashford plugged in that gray Model S, she would be shaking hands with a ghost. I named the file the Motherboard Melter. I finished the assembly at 4 a.m. on Friday. It was a small black box, dense and heavy, packed with capacitors. I wired it directly into my main distribution panel, upstream of where Rocco had spliced in. To the outside world, nothing had changed. The illegal tap was still there. The power was still flowing. But now, the stream was poisoned. I tested the recognition software using a simulator. Green light, grid normal. I input the Tesla handshake code. The light on the box turned instantly from green to red. The display read, "Target acquired. Harmonic distortion. Protocol engaged." I sat back in my chair and rubbed my eyes. I was exhausted, but my mind was razor sharp. I checked the community newsletter Corinne had slid into my mailbox earlier that day. Saturday evening, Green Energy Gala, Block Party and Sustainability Showcase. Special guest, the mayor's deputy chief of staff. Corinne was going to host a party. She was going to show off her new charging station. She was going to brag to the entire neighborhood about how she had tamed the new guy. It was the perfect stage. Saturday arrived with a humid heat that stuck to your skin. By 5 p.m., the cul-de-sac was blocked off with orange cones. A catering van was setting up tables on the sidewalk. Balloons in green and white bobbed in the heavy air. Corinne was in her element, wearing a fresh light blue suit, directing the setup crew with frantic hand gestures. Julian was there, of course. He moved through the gathering crowd like a shark in a wading pool, shaking hands, leaning in close to whisper confidences, patting shoulders. I watched from my living room window. I saw him talking to the neighbors, gesturing toward my house, then laughing. He was sowing the narrative. I could almost hear the words. He is a hoarder. He does not want to share. But Corinne broke him. We fixed him. I walked out onto my porch at 6:30. I held a glass of iced tea and sat in the rocking chair, placing my tablet on my lap. The interface for my device was open. Status, standby. The crowd had grown to about 50 people. Neighbors I had never met were mingling, drinking white wine in plastic cups. Corinne stood by the charging pedestal, which was draped in a silk sheet for the unveiling. She held a microphone. The feedback squealed and she tapped it impatiently. Attention! Attention, everyone! The chatter died down. Julian stood to her right, clapping softly, encouraging the applause. Thank you all for coming, Corinne announced, her voice echoing off the houses. Tonight is a milestone for Greenhaven. We are proving that sustainable leadership requires bold action. We faced resistance. She paused, casting a pointed look at me on the porch. The crowd turned to look. I raised my glass of tea in a silent toast. We faced selfishness, she continued, emboldened by Julian's nod. But we persevered. We have secured a dedicated high-speed energy node for the HOA leadership, ensuring that those who steer the ship are always powered up. She thinks she is launching a spaceship, I muttered to myself. Julian stepped up to the mic, placing a hand on Corinne's shoulder. What Corinne is too modest to say, he crooned, his voice smooth as velvet, is that she took a personal risk to bridge the gap. She absorbed the negativity of the skeptics and transmuted it into power for us all. This charger is not just a machine, it is a symbol of triumph over ego. The crowd murmured appreciatively. Transmuted it into power, I chuckled. That is technically accurate, Julian. Corinne beamed, feeding off the praise. It was the dynamic Julian had engineered perfectly. Create a crisis, guide her through it, and let her claim the victory while he kept the control. He had made her feel like a conqueror for stealing electricity. And now, Corinne shouted, to christen the station! She gestured to the driveway. Her husband, a quiet man who looked like he had surrendered years ago, drove the gray Tesla slowly up to the pedestal. The car gleamed in the evening sun. He put it in park and got out. Corinne grabbed the charging cable. She held it high, like Excalibur. Free energy, she yelled. For the leadership! She ripped the silk sheet off the pedestal. The crowd cheered. I looked down at my tablet. The signal strength was strong. The device was reading the line voltage. 120 volts, 60 hertz, stable. Corinne stepped up to the car. She flipped open the charge port door. Watch this, she said to the deputy chief of staff, who looked bored and was checking his watch. High-speed uptake. She plugged the connector into the car. Click. The ring around the port turned blue, indicating a connection. On my tablet, a new window popped up. Handshake detected. VIN match confirmed. A dialog box appeared. Initiate harmonic distortion? I looked at Corinne. She was glowing with pride, her hand resting on the hood of the car, smiling at Julian. Julian was smiling back, but his eyes were already scanning the crowd for the next person to manipulate. He didn't care about the car. He didn't care about the power. He cared that he had won. I looked at the yes button on my screen. This wasn't just about a stolen utility. This was about a bully who thought the rules were for other people, and a manipulator who thought he was smarter than the systems he exploited. I took a sip of tea. I tapped the screen. If you're still here at this point, and you are ready to see some sparks fly, leave a lightning bolt word in the comments to help charge up this video. The reaction was instantaneous. From inside my garage, a low, ominous thrum vibrated through the floorboards as the capacitors discharged. It wasn't a loud noise, but it was felt more than heard. A sudden shift in air pressure. At the pedestal, the effect was visible. The blue light on the Tesla's charge port didn't just turn green. It flashed a violent, blinding white. A sound like a cracking whip snapped through the cul-de-sac. Crack, zzz. The heavy orange cable that Rocco had installed stiffened as if rigor mortis had set in instantly. Smoke, thick and black, erupted from the connection point on the car. The crowd gasped, stumbling back. Corinne shrieked and jumped away, nearly tripping over her high heels. "What was that?" she screamed. On the dashboard screen of the Tesla, visible through the windshield, a red warning graphic flashed. Critical fault. Then the screen went black. A second later, a dull pop came from deep within the chassis of the vehicle, followed by the hiss of venting gas. The acrid smell of burning electronics hit the air, but the surge didn't stop at the car. Physics doesn't take sides. It just follows the path of least resistance. Rocco had grounded the system to a rusted fence post, but he had bonded the neutral to Corinne's house sub-panel to save wire. The 400 Hz harmonic distortion hit the car, found nowhere to go, and bounced back. It traveled up the neutral line, bypassed the meter, and slammed into Corinne's home electrical panel. Behind Corinne, the porch lights of her house flared incredibly bright, like stadium lights, for 1 second. Pop, pop, pop. The bulbs exploded in unison, raining glass onto the porch. The music from the outdoor speakers turned into a demonic screech before cutting out completely. Inside the house, we could hear the distinct sound of fire alarms going off. Not the pulsing beep, but the continuous wail of systems failing. The smart home automation she bragged about, the blinds, the thermostat, the security hub, fried instantly. The automated garage door started opening and closing rapidly, jerking violently on its tracks until the motor burned out with a grinding crunch. "My car! My house!" Corinne screamed, spinning in circles. She looked at the charging cable still smoking. She grabbed it to pull it out, but the handle was visibly melting. "Don't touch it!" someone yelled, but she yanked it anyway. Sparks cascaded onto her shoes. She dropped it, screaming again. She turned to Julian. "Julian, do something! Fix it!" I watched Julian. This was the moment. The stress and relief cycle. He was supposed to step in, calm her down, and offer a solution that deepened her dependence on him. But Julian Vane was looking at the smoking car, then at the exploding lights of the house, and finally, at me. He saw me sitting on the porch, tablet in hand, face impassive. He did the math. This wasn't a random surge. This was a counterstrike. And Julian Vane did not stand in the blast radius of someone else's war. He closed his notebook. He slipped his pen into his pocket. He looked at Corinne, who was reaching out to him, mascara running down her face. "Julian, help me," she pleaded. Julian took a step back. Then another. He pulled his phone from his pocket, tapped the screen a few times. I knew he was deleting his call history with her. And then he looked at me again. He gave me a single slight shrug. It was a gesture of concession. "You got her." Then he turned around, walked through the stunned crowd, got into his black sedan, and drove away without a backward glance. He left her. He abandoned the architecture he had built the moment it caught fire. Corinne stood alone in the wreckage of her victory. The car was dead. The house was dark. The guests were backing away, phones out, recording the meltdown. She looked wild, abandoned, and furious. Her eyes locked onto me. She pointed a trembling finger. "You!" she shrieked, her voice tearing through the sound of the fire alarms. "You did this! You sabotaged me!" I stood up slowly and walked down the steps of my porch. I stopped at the edge of the property line, safely on my side of the grass. "I didn't do anything, Corinne," I said, my voice calm but carrying over the noise. "You illegally spliced into a military-grade power supply. You bypassed the surge protectors. You tried to drink from a fire hose with a plastic straw." "I'm calling the police," she yelled, fumbling for her phone. "I'm calling the fire marshal. You're going to jail for arson." "Call them," I said. "Call them all, but make sure you tell them who dug the trench." The sirens were already audible in the distance. The fire marshal was coming. The police were coming. And Corinne Ashford was standing next to an illegal tap, a melted car, and a house full of fried electronics, holding the smoking gun. She thought this was the end of the world. But I knew the truth. This wasn't the end. This was just the discovery phase. Because when the authorities started peeling back the layers of what Corinne and Julian had been doing, they weren't just going to find a stolen power line. They were going to find the reason why she needed so much power in the first place. And that secret was buried deeper than any cable. Hit subscribe and that thanks button if you think Corinne is about to face a meltdown way hotter than her fried motherboard. The sirens that had been a distant wail were now a deafening reality as a ladder truck and 2 patrol cars screeched into the cul-de-sac. The flashing red and blue lights painted the scene in a chaotic strobe effect, illuminating the smoke still drifting from Corinne's Tesla and the stunned faces of the neighbors. Corinne saw the uniforms and immediately switched tactics. She smoothed her soot-stained jacket, wiped the mascara from her cheeks, and pointed a trembling finger at me as Officer Kalin stepped out of his cruiser. "Officer, thank heavens!" she shouted, her voice pitching up into a performance of victimhood that deserved an award. "This man attacked my home. He used some kind of cyber weapon to blow up my car and my electrical panel. I want him arrested for domestic terrorism." Officer Kalin looked tired. He knew Corinne. Every cop in the precinct knew Corinne. He adjusted his belt and looked at the smoking car, then at the house where the fire alarm was still shrieking, and finally at me standing calmly on the grass. "Domestic terrorism, Mrs. Ashford?" he asked, his tone flat. "That is a big word. Looks like an electrical fire from here." "It was sabotage," she insisted, grabbing his arm. "He hacked the grid. He is a dangerous man." "I did not hack anything," I said, stepping forward. I held up the heavy orange cable I had dug up earlier, the ends still capped with safety nuts, alongside the fresh, melted mess Rocco had installed. I protected my property, and Inspector Holloway is going to want to see this. A heavy-set man in turnout gear walked over from the fire truck. He held a thermal camera similar to mine but industrial grade. This was Inspector Holloway, the fire marshal, a man who cared about building codes more than he cared about breathing. He ignored Corinne and pointed the camera at the ground where the smoke was thickest. "Who dug this trench?" Holloway asked, his voice gravelly. He kicked the dirt, exposing the charred remains of the splice Rocco had performed. "This is unauthorized direct burial cable, insufficient gauge, no conduit, and it looks like it was grounded to a fence post. This isn't a tap, it's an incendiary device." Corinne's face went pale. "It was a community sustainability project," she stammered. "We had a contractor, a professional." "A professional?" Holloway scoffed. He knelt down and pulled up the melted end of the wire. "This is Rocco's work. I know his signature. Sloppy tape, no heat shrink. I revoked his license 4 years ago for burning down a garage in the next county." He stood up and loomed over Corinne. "Mrs. Ashford, did you hire an unlicensed contractor to bypass a utility meter and trench into a neighboring property?" I... Corinne looked around for Julian, but the spot where he had been standing was empty. The architect of her misery had fled the scene. "I was advised it was legal under the HOA bylaws." "HOA bylaws don't supersede the National Fire Code, ma'am," Holloway snapped. "And they certainly don't supersede federal law." "Federal?" Corinne squeaked. I stepped in. "Inspector," I said, handing him the thick black binder I had retrieved from my house. "You might want to look at tab 3. This property isn't residential zoning. It is a decommissioned strategic relay station sold via federal liquidation. That transformer she tapped into? It is the Department of Defense surplus infrastructure. She didn't just steal power from a neighbor, she tampered with a secured federal utility easement." Holloway opened the binder. He scanned the blueprints, the stamps from the Army Corps of Engineers, and the deed restrictions. His eyebrows shot up. He looked at the melted cable, then at Corinne with a look that was somewhere between pity and disbelief. "Holy cow," he muttered. "Mrs. Ashford, you are in a lot of trouble. Tampering with this class of infrastructure isn't a misdemeanor. It is a felony. And since the fire originated from an illegal tap entering your dwelling, we have to inspect the residence to ensure the fire hasn't spread inside the walls." "No!" Corinne shouted, jumping in front of him. "You can't go inside. The fire was just the lights. It's fine. It's private property." "Ma'am, your panel exploded," Holloway said, his patience gone. "This is an active fire scene. I am not asking for permission." He signaled 2 firefighters. "Check the breaker panel in the basement. Thermal scans showing heat buildup in the lower level." "Not the basement!" Corinne screamed, lunging at the door, but Officer Kalin caught her arm. "Step back, Mrs. Ashford. Let them do their job." I watched as the firefighters breached the front door. Smoke billowed out, smelling of ozone and burning plastic. They disappeared inside. Corinne was hyperventilating now, her eyes darting to the street where Julian's car had vanished. She knew what was down there. I knew what was down there too. The load variance on my monitor hadn't just been a car. A Tesla pulls 50 amps, maybe 80 if you have the high-speed charger. But the draw I had seen was 200 amps, continuous, 24 hours a day. You don't pull that kind of power to charge a sedan. You pull that kind of power to run a farm. 10 minutes later, Holloway walked out of the house. He wasn't holding a fire extinguisher. He was holding a server blade, a high-end dedicated crypto mining unit, its casing warped from heat. He walked straight up to Corinne and held it up. "We found the source of the secondary load," he said. "Your basement is packed wall to wall with these things, at least 40 units. You weren't just charging a car, Mrs. Ashford. You were running an industrial data center on a residential line. No wonder the neutral wire melted. You turned your house into a blast furnace." The neighbors gasped. The green energy narrative evaporated instantly. Corinne wasn't a sustainability hero. She was a crypto miner stealing power to fuel a get-rich-quick scheme. "It wasn't my idea," Corinne sobbed, finally breaking. "It was Julian. He said it was passive income. He said the community power grid could handle it. He set it all up." "Julian Vane?" I asked, stepping closer. "The emotional architect." "He's not an architect," she wailed. "He's a consultant. He brought the machines. He said we split the profits 70-30. I just provided the location. He said he needed the new power line because the old one kept tripping the breakers." It all fits. Julian Vane hadn't just manipulated her ego. He had weaponized her greed. He used the HOA presidency as a cover to secure free industrial-grade power for a mining operation he didn't have to pay for or house. He was the parasite, and she was the host. "He has the wallet keys," Corinne cried. "All the money is on his server. He just left with it." "He didn't get far," I said calmly. I pulled my phone out and showed Officer Kalin the screen. When I engaged the harmonic distortion protocol, I didn't just fry the hardware. I traced the data packets. The mining rig was broadcasting a heartbeat signal to a remote IP address every 3 seconds. I geolocated the receiver. I pointed to the map on my screen. "He is currently parked 3 blocks away, behind the old elementary school, likely wiping his hard drives." "And officer, I forwarded this location to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division about 10 minutes ago. They have been looking for a Julian Vane in connection with a multi-state Ponzi scheme involving renewable energy credits." Officer Kalin grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, I need a unit at the elementary school. Suspect vehicle black sedan. Possible federal warrant subject." Corinne slumped against the hood of a police cruiser, her light blue suit ruined, her status destroyed. She looked at me, her eyes hollow. "You knew," she whispered. "You knew the whole time." "I knew you were drawing too much power," I said. "Physics doesn't lie, Corinne. People do." The fallout was swift and brutal. Julian Vane was arrested sitting in his car, frantically trying to smash a laptop against the dashboard. They found $3 million in cold wallets on a thumb drive in his pocket, money he had siphoned from gullible HOA boards across 3 counties under the guise of community investment projects. He was charged with grand larceny, fraud, and tax evasion. The emotional architect would have plenty of time to analyze the structural tension of a federal prison cell. Corinne didn't fare much better. Her insurance company took one look at the fire marshal's report, citing the illegal splice, the unlicensed contractor, and the commercial mining operation in a residential zone, and denied her claim in record time. She was on the hook for the repairs to her house, the destruction of the Tesla, and the damage to the grid infrastructure. The total was north of $150,000. The HOA board, realizing they had been complicit in a federal crime, voted to remove her as president in an emergency session held right there on the lawn. They dissolved the utility easement sharing bylaw before the fire trucks even left. 3 weeks later, the neighborhood was quiet. The orange cones were gone. The crater in Corinne's driveway had been filled, though the house remained dark and boarded up. She had moved in with her sister while the bank foreclosed. I was in my garage working on a new project when a legitimate utility truck pulled up. A crew in hard hats hopped out to inspect the transformer and certify the grid repairs. The foreman walked up the driveway, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Vance?" he asked. "Just finished the audit on the transformer. You run a tight ship. That surge protection you built saved the main relay. If that backlash had hit the grid, we would have lost power for 3 blocks." "Just doing my part for the neighborhood," I said, wiping grease from my hands. "One thing, though," the foreman said, tapping his pen on the paper. "We found a strange device wired into your sub-panel. Some kind of frequency modulator? It looks like it was designed to push 400 hertz. I smiled and picked up the small black box from my workbench. It was disconnected now, a souvenir of a short but intense war. "That?" I said. "That is just a surge protector. A very specific kind. It stops parasites." He laughed, not quite understanding, and signed off on the paperwork. "Well, whatever it is, keep it offline. We don't want any more melting cars." "For sure," I said. "As long as the neighbors respect the property lines, the physics stays standard." I walked out to the porch as the truck drove away. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden light over the greenbelt. The pedestal next door had been removed, leaving only a patch of disturbed earth where Corinne's ambition had once stood. The silence was genuine now, not enforced. There was no hum of stolen power, no shrill voice barking orders, no manipulative whispers from a man in a turtleneck. Just the wind in the trees and the steady 60 hertz heartbeat of a grid that was finally secure. Power isn't just about voltage or amperage or who has the biggest transformer. It is about knowing where the current flows. Corinne thought power was a title she could wear like a suit. Julian thought power was a game he could play with other people's lives. But they forgot the most basic rule of electricity. Current always returns to the source. And if you try to divert it, if you try to steal it, if you try to control something you do not understand, you don't just get burned. You get grounded. I took a sip of my iced tea and looked at the empty house next door. The for sale sign was already up. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number for the listing agent. After all, I had been thinking about expanding my lab, and a house with a pre-wired basement server room, even a crispy one, had potential. Hit subscribe and that thanks button if you think Corinne and Julian got exactly what they deserved.